Hello everyone, wherever you are around the world, thanks for joining us here for the conclusion of Million Dollar Magic Weekend. It's been an incredible ride through Thursday, Friday and Saturday, and now here we go again with the matches that really matter. Rich Hagan alongside Pro Tour champion Simon Gertzen, Maria Bartholdi, and from inside R&D at Wizards of the Coast, Mr. Paul Cheon. We are gearing up for the Silver Showcase final here, and it is going to be great stuff. If you've missed the last 3 days, where have you been? So much going on. And why don't we start by looking at the bracket for our Silver Showcase. The players came in on Thursday to Rochester Draft. Paul, what is Rochester?
Well, Rochester Draft is basically normal draft. Not really. It's basically a draft where every single person opens their booster face up, and everybody gets to see what everybody else drafts. So you start with the booster, you draft the pack, then you go to the next person, you open the booster, you take a pack. So signaling is a lot easier because you know exactly the colors your neighbors are in, and oftentimes, you know, people play friendly, although that's not necessarily the case for this draft.
Okay.
All right, let's talk about the quarterfinals, Paul, because you were in the booth for this. Tell us about something awesome that happened, maybe your favorite thing that you saw in the quarterfinals.
I really enjoyed the fact that a lot of these players had main deck color hosing cards because they knew exactly who they were playing and they knew what deck they were playing. So as a result, I liked both Cifka and Shuhei Nakamura playing red Elemental Blast in the main deck, and then the other player playing blue Elemental Blast to counter each other. And Cifka was actually able to utilize that red Elemental Blast as a counter to resolve his very powerful X spells.
Yeah, it was fantastic stuff. Now, as you can see, Jason Chan, Paolo Vida, Dama de Rosa, John Finkel and Stanislva Cifka advanced on Friday to the semi-finals. And Simon, you had the ringside seat this time last night for our semi-finals. What was your takeaway from those two matches?
Black-red is good in this format. If you have all the powerful X spells and removal spells, even the creatures are decent. We saw John Finkel and Stanislva Cifka arguably with two of the best decks at the table. Stanislva Cifka beating John Finkel, but I think it could have gone either way.
So I think the important takeaway is that if there is ever again a Beta, Legends, half Antiquities, half Arabians, Beta, Rochester Draft.
Black-red.
Black-red, we're in. Just force it.
Absolutely.
Very clearly. All right, so we are down to our final two, and it really is the world of gaming because yesterday we had Hong Kong, Brazil, Czech Republic and USA. Now it's Hong Kong and the Czech Republic. Maria.
All right, so let's take a look at our first finalist. This is Amaz, Jason Chan, known for being a Hearthstone streamer who began playing Magic, though, with Magic Origins, and he's a very good player. His team made actually top 32 at this Pro Tour, so he's no slouch at Magic either, and he loves limited play, so I can agree with that, Amaz. Let's take a look at what his deck looks like, what he's put together for us, and yeah, so we know we're splashing Shivan Dragon, we know we're splashing Fireball. Those are two of the very powerful cards in his deck. Let's hear from Jason Chan the other day.
I'm here with Jason Chan, better known to most people as Amaz. Jason, what role does Magic play for you in your gaming career?
Oh, that's a good one, because when I first started Hearthstone, all my Hearthstone players, they know Magic, right? Because they started Magic and then Hearthstone. I'm kind of the other way around. And they will always talk about like these cool Magic cards and like, you know, Magic strategy and whatnot, and I would just sit there being kind of like a dummy. So Magic for me is kind of like, I want to beat my friends, you know? And it's kind of like a hobby. And then, you know, I gradually mixed into like more competitive play, more sort of limited. Went to a lot of GPs and limited, and then now I'm playing standard. So it's gonna be a rough one, but I practice a lot. So yeah.
Now I know I've definitely played against you online, and the Amaz, you know, the gamer handle being so much more well known than your real name.
Oh yeah.
Can be. You actually did really well last weekend at the Grand Prix here in Minneapolis.
Oh, I'm definitely more comfortable in limited. I was 1 round away from top 8, and yeah, just really like limited. Drafting in Magic is something that no other game really offers, so I'm like really attuned to it. And I'm gonna be doing a beta draft, but then I couldn't really practice that because, you know, Magic Online doesn't, you know, have that obviously, and it's really hard to find real life cards. So I did some generators online, and hopefully I'll do well, you know.
All right, Jason, good luck this weekend here at the Silver Showcase.
Why don't we take a look at Amaz's deck list for this tournament? All right, Paul, your takeaway here, power.
Yeah, just taking a look at his list, just in terms of pure power level, I think he has one of the best decks at the table. The issue is mana base. That's the big concern. You know, he's got a lot of powerful cards, but he's playing Shivan Dragon with 2 mountains, and he's got a lot of double green and double black spells. So, you know, there is potential for him to be punished because he's not going to be able to cast his spells in time.
All right, let's go to the other side of the table. It is Stanislav Cifka, his opponent, and there you see him, 2 Pro Tour top 8s, the win, of course, for his Eggs combo deck win. Let's take a look at his deck for you. In graphic form, it's black-red powerful. We've already said this. There's Fireball, there's Pyrotechnics. More from Simon in a moment. But first, let's hear from the Czech chess master, Stanislav Cifka.
I'm here with Pro Tour Return to Ravnica champion Stanislav Cifka, returning to the Pro Tour here for the Silver Showcase. Stan, I understand you went to great lengths to prepare for this tournament. Tell us what you did.
The format is so unique, and I actually had no idea how to prepare at first, so I even had to spend a lot of time to realize what should I do, because like it was so unique. And how it ended is that I printed the cards to prepare, because now it's not that easy to get a beta boosters, anymore. And so I printed the cards, and then we simulated the beta drafts, and like obviously the other sets as well. So I hope it will pay off. Like I don't know, like the competition is tough.
How many drafts would you say you got to do going into this table?
With the other pro players, we made 3 drafts, so it's not much, but just the draft is very time-consuming, and we also discussed like what everyone would pick there. So I felt we were improved during these drafts.
You feel like from draft 1 to draft 3, you could see a real strategic improvement for yourself?
Yes, and like it's actually even the draft process took us like half of a day. So like maybe if I say like, yeah, we played 3 drafts, but every draft is like the whole day work. So it's actually not that few.
All right, Stan. Well, good luck. I hope to see how this playtesting pays off in practice here at the Pro Tour.
All right, Simon, so let's look at the list for Stanislav Cifka, black-red as we know. Is it all about the spells, or are those 10 creatures going to be enough?
The creature base of Stan is a lot worse. Black-red just doesn't have anything that competes with the big green creatures. The spells are much better. If Stan gets off a Mind Twist, even Sinkhole against Amaz's mana base could be really, really powerful. Of course, we do have to mention the fact that the 2 red Elemental Blasts are going to be dead in Game 1, so that could be a big factor as well.
All right.
Well, the players are ready, so let's head down to the feature match area for the finals of the Silver Showcase.
Hello and welcome to the finals of the Silver Showcase here from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Hall of Famer Luis Scott Vargas, and we're going to get a chance to see, well, an appropriate final for the 25th anniversary of Magic, because these are some of the oldest cards in the game. Our players are ready, they're ready and raring to go. We've heard about the decks. Let's head down to our feature match area to see how it plays out. Hello and welcome to the finals of the Silver Showcase. I am Tim Willoughby, joined by Hall of Famer Luis Scott Vargas. And Luis, we've got some nice decks in our final here.
Yeah, these decks look pretty good. Cifka's deck is amazing. Cifka's deck is, I think, the best deck at the table from looking at the lists, and I would say that he is a favorite here. Just he's got a more powerful curve of spells, and he's got a good mana base. His biggest drawback is something that they just mentioned at the desk there. He's got 2 red Elemental Blasts in his main deck.
So let's have a look at our players. Starting things off with Amaz, very popular gamer, very popular streamer, and he's been on a little bit of a tear with Magic recently. And you know what? His deck, it's got some very, very powerful cards, but at the same time, it may find, especially in Game 1, a couple of issues with mana. He's really stretching his mana base to try and play powerful cards like Shivan Dragon in red, even though he's principally black-green. But he's very focused, and his opponent on the other side of the table, Stanislav Cifka, he won Pro Tour Return to Ravnica. He is a master at chess and was from a young age, and he's also a very successful Hearthstone player. These 2 consummate gamers.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how these match plays out. A lot of it is going to hinge on who has Pestilence. That is the best overall card in the format, and just being able to control the board with that card is really important. But there, Stan has a couple different paths to victory. He can land an early Mind Twist. Amaz can draw his red cards and not his mountains. Stan can Sinkhole. Amaz only has 2 mountains. If Stan Sinkholes a mountain and then kills the Fire Sprite out of Amaz's deck, Amaz can't actually cast Shivan Dragon.
Shivan Dragon. It was the last rare opened in the entirety of the Rochester draft. Jason Chan, fortunate enough to be in the right seat to be able to first pick it, and it was pivotal in his making his way through the quarterfinals, but in the semifinals, he never once drew it. There's enough power in Chan's deck that he can win without the dragon. So Cifka here, we can see he's got a Blazing Effigy in hand, but for now, he's not deploying any creatures at all.
He might be waiting on the Blazing Effigy because he does have Pestilence, and he also knows that Amaz has Pestilence. So Pestilence does have the clause. If there's no creatures in play at the end of the turn, it gets sacrificed. So if he plays it, it'll give Amaz a window to play Pestilence. And Effigy also is not optional. We're talking old cards here. When Effigy dies, it deals 3 damage to another creature. If Cifka has 2 creatures in play and Amaz kills the Effigy, it will deal 3 damage to his other creature.
So along comes the Fire Sprites. This is one of only 3 sources of red mana in Jason Chan's deck. Definitely a target for Stan if he's got a way of removing it.
Well, one good thing is that because the Shivan Dragon can't come down until turn 6, Stan doesn't need to kill the Fire Sprites yet. And starting with Rook Egg lets him go next turn Pestilence, Pestilence for 1, and Rook Egg plus Pestilence is a very potent combination because, first of all, it has 3 toughness, so it doesn't die to Pestilence. Second, if it does die to Pestilence, which you might want to kill it off, it gets you a 4/4 flyer.
Yeah, so Ironroot Tree Fruit coming from Jason Chan, that one of the creatures that is comparatively safe from Pestilence, a 3/5 creature for 5 mana, and obviously for modern day players, a 3/5 for 5 doesn't look that exciting, but Luis, how good is a relatively large creature in these early drafts?
Any creature that has kind of like 3/3 or bigger stats is quite good, and Ironroot Tree Folk is among that.
The Rook Egg there. One of the cards that in the early stages of the game, it wasn't quite clear to people quite how it worked. People thought that perhaps you could discard it and get a 4/4, and at that stage, it actually was very briefly on the banned list. How things have changed. The Arabian Nights, actually common at the time, reprinted in 9th edition at Rare.
Yeah, I do remember it when discarding a Rook Egg would get you a 4/4. People thought it did, and yeah, it was pretty good at that point.
Okay, so along comes Pestilence, and Pestilence really can change the shape of the game. Every black mana available to Stan Cifka can now be a point of damage to all creatures and players.
Managing Pestilence is tricky, and this card is really just an absurd Magic card because Stan has the ability to essentially repeatedly board wipe, deal damage. Like, he can block Ironroot Tree Folk with a 2/2 and then Pestilence for 3. Just the fact that you can at instant speed do it, it makes it just really hard to play against, really powerful, and will dominate most games if it's unchecked.
Yeah, not a coincidence that both of the players in this final have got a copy of Pestilence in their deck. At common, it's one of those cards that even if you opened it and couldn't find a way of playing it, you definitely did not want to be passing it. So Chan here plays an Unholy Strength on his Ironroot Tree Folk, so it is now a 5/6, a gigantic monster.
Stan has to decide whether he wants to upgrade his Rook Egg into a Rook. He gets to make a 4/4 if he so desires. And the thing is, Pestilence also damages players, so Stan can block, make a 4/4, attack back for 4, and then next turn, start Pestilencing to win the race.
Moss Monster the play here after combat for Jason Chan. That a 3/6 creature, so he has creatures that are ultimately relatively unafraid of Pestilence, but Pestilence does hit life totals too, so we could still have a race on our hands here. Chan's deck also has, and both of these decks have Fireball, but Chan's deck also has a copy of Howl from Beyond, so he has the potential to do a lot of burst damage, especially if he pairs it up with the 1 copy of Berserk that he was able to draft as well.
And Stan also has Pyrotechnics, which he has in hand, and then Disintegrate and Fireball in his deck. So and a Drain Life. So Stan actually has quite a bit of reach as well. And I like swinging with the Rook here, and then Blazing Effigy is a pretty nice blocker. you can like chump the Iron Root Tree Folk, deal 3 to the Moss Monster, and then, or just block the Moss Monster, deal 3 to the Iron Root Tree Folk, and then end up, you know, finishing it off. But the second Rook Egg is going to be really powerful in terms of winning the race.
Yeah, not too terribly many flying creatures that can tussle with a 4/4. We know that Jason Chan has a copy of Shivan Dragon, but right now he needs to draw back-to-back mountains if he's going to cast it. Weakness comes down here on Moss Monster. That's -2, -1, kind of the reverse of Unholy Strength. So now that Moss Monster, it's just a 1/5 creature.
And at this point, Stan is very far ahead because he can block the Iron Root Tree Folk with his Rook Egg, make another Rook, attack Jason down to 7, and then if he Pestilence for 1 in return, that basically puts Jason at 6, and then Amaz is dead to Stan having just another Swamp. And even if Stan didn't have another Swamp, he wasn't losing the race anyway.
Yeah, Jason Chan here, his creature's getting outclassed by the Rooks that he gets one solid block off with and then can just go to the air.
Ooh, Lure in Jason Chan's hand is going to be pretty effective. He can put that on the Moss Monster and then force the Rook Egg to block the 1-powered Moss Monster and not turn into a 4/4.
Yeah, I like that quite a bit. Lure was a card that we saw being instrumental in the final victory for Jason Chan in his quarterfinals against Dave Williams. Dave with a pretty potent red-white deck, sporting such classics as Sarah Angel. But 5 damage, as he so carefully stated there, Louise, coming through from the Unroot Tree Folk. We've got a real race on our hands here. It must be said that at this point, Jason Chan, not too many cards left to work with. Meanwhile, there is a fair amount of action still going on for Stanislva Cifka. If he wants to put down blockers, he can do so. And that Pyrotechnic, sooner or later, represents a pretty big change to the clock.
And here you see Pestilence used as a burn spell, and it lets Stan manage life totals in such a way that he will win the race. He also now has the option to Pestilence away his own Rook Egg. So he can block the Moss Monster, which he's obliged to do, but then at the end of Jason's second main phase, Pestilence so his Rook Egg dies, and then because it triggers for end of turn, you get a 4/4. You attack with both your 4/4 flyers, and then you finish things off with Pestilence. So Stan knows he's going to win the game unless Jason has something like Howl from Beyond plus Berserk or some combination of cards. I don't think one card does it. He also could be playing around Jason having Fireball or Mountain in hand and then drawing the other half of that combo.
Yeah, I guess that specifically with Rochester, obviously in this exact case, these guys have seen each other's deck lists by now, but in Rochester, you can think about literally every card that you've seen your opponent draft, and that means that sometimes not only the draft, but even the gameplay can go a little slower as people just stop and think about what the exact cards are that could stop them.
Yeah, and having tested with Stan, I mean, he was on our test team for this Pro Tour. We actually did one of the practice drafts with him. He definitely is the type of person to play around all the possibilities, especially when he's in a spot where he can afford to, which is right here, where he's winning by a significant margin.
Yeah, Stan Cifka, he got his chess master level while still a teenager, and there are some phenomenal stories of his memory specifically, playing blind games of chess where his opponents can see the board, he's not even looking at the board, and he's still able to just construct it all in his mind and find a way of winning. As things stand here, he's doing that with a full view of what's at least on the table, attacks again with that bird token, and Jason Chan's life total is tumbling now. So the Guardian Beast in Stanislav Cifka's hand, it's a 2/4 that in this exact matchup, because he has no other artifacts in his deck, it doesn't really do a whole lot more than that. As things stand, he just plays Blazing Effigy though, because that leaves a full 4 swamps in play to be able to use with that Pestilence. Now if you're Jason Chan here, you need quite a lot to be able to get out of this one.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, Jason doesn't really have many plays he can make. He can choose not to attack, but that doesn't really accomplish anything. He can attack, and then if he has no way to stop Stan from turning his Rook Eggs into Rooks, then he's just going to lose to the Pestilence. Oubliette is not bad. That card can exile the 4/4 flyer, so that does give Jason a little bit of breathing room.
But I mean, I guess that there could be 4 damage end of turn, fly in for 4 damage from Pestilence. So even ignoring that bird token, he's still in a very rough spot here.
Yeah, Pestilence has just dominated this game completely. The rook eggs have not been bad either.
You can see here Chan deep in the tank. Both these players really thinking about everything. And we saw actually Jason Chan, part of the way that he was able to make it through to these finals, he successfully remembered that Paulo Vitor da Rosa had drafted 4 Spike. And when he had his big X spells against the Brazilian Hall of Famer, he chose to play around them, having recognized, even though they weren't in the main deck of the Brazilian Pro, that they were something worth considering. So Jason, he's definitely willing to think his way around a problem.
Unfortunately, you can't think your way around Pestilence.
So a big attack here. Both creatures coming in. The lure on that Moss Monster means that everything has to block it. Blazing Effigy and Rookig getting in the way. 5 damage coming from that Tree Folk there.
And this race could come down to 1 point because Cifka's at 7. Amaz kills the 4/4 flyer. Cifka Pestilences himself down to 3, and Amaz down to 6. Attacks Amaz down to 2, Pestilence for 2, putting himself to 1. So he's going to win this race by 1 point of damage.
And I guess a question for you, Luis. Pestilence, obviously very, very good when there's lots of creatures on the board that you want to kill. How far behind do you have to be before Pestilence is not good enough? Because it is damaging you at the same time.
It's really just going to depend on the board situation, but even if it damages you, like let's say Cifka wasn't in a position to win this race, he might be able to Pestilence and wipe the board and just both players go to very low life totals. But here he does attack and then use Pestilence to finish off Jason, so Cifka will take game 1 based on that.
All right, the power of Stan Cifka's deck. We've only seen part of it, but Pestilence, a big enough part to be able to take that game 1. We will, of course, be back with plenty more from this final very soon. Do not go anywhere. The finals of the Silver Showcase continues after these messages. Hello and welcome back to this, the finals of the Silver Showcase. Tim Willoughby and Luis Scott Vargas here bringing you all of the action. And we've already seen Pro Tour return to Ravnica champion Stanislva Cifka picking up the first game win here. These guys now deep in thought about keeping their opening hands because while we've been on an ad break, these guys have been sideboarding and there will likely have been a few small changes to these lists after.
Yeah, I would imagine that Stan does not want 2 copies of Red Elemental Blast against his Jund opponent.
As things stand here, Jason Chan on the play does not have too much early doors, and we see already before anything has even happened, we've got Cifka with a little bit of an advantage. Why is that, Luis?
Well, if we take a look at Jason's hand, it was a very keepable hand, but his first relevant play is turn 5. He has Argothian Treefolk, and now Ironroot Treefolk just got added, along with Lure and Howl from Beyond. A 5-drop being the only thing he can do versus Stanislav Cifka is already on the board with Urg Raiders and is about to play a Hazran Ogress. So this gives Cifka a lot of damage on the board, and he's going to deal 8 damage. He's going to get or 7 damage, get Amaz down to 13 before he has a single first play. And if Stan can follow it up with any sort of removal or action, then Amaz is going to have a really hard time winning.
Yeah, we see big attacks here from those 2 early creatures, and I feel like Jason here, Amaz, has taken a bit of a gamble hoping that Stan doesn't draw the aggressive creatures in his deck, because his deck is a little bit light on creatures, and that gamble has really not paid off. Walking Dead now also joining the team for Stan Cifka. 2 mana, 1/1 with Regenerate, a functional reprint of Drudge Skeletons, but for the creature type, and finally a Moss Monster coming down for Jason Chan, which he's going to have to hope is a good enough roadblock here.
It will do an effective job of blocking. I like this attack from Stan. He's basically losing one of his creatures, probably the Hazran Ogress, in order to push 3 points of damage through, partially because he drew Vampire Bats, a flyer, also because he's got 3 different X spells in his deck, Drain Life, Fireball, Disintegrate, that can burn Jason Chan out from even a relatively high life total.
And, of course, the Pestilence that we saw in the first game. It's not quite an X-Spell in the same way, but gradually you pump lots of mana into it and it will kill off most opponents. There comes the Vampire Bat. Great for Stan Cifka in the quarterfinals. Dealt a lot of damage to Shuhei Nakamura. And here, it's going to be able to fly through each and every turn. We can see that Cifka, most of the action he has is already on the table. Just a Detonate as a spell in hand. He needs to find an artifact if he's going to be able to use that particular X-Spell in order to deal even more damage.
Yeah, and that means that if Amaz does draw his Jayemdae Tome, then Detonate is going to do some good work.
Jayemdae Tome, a very, very powerful card from the early days of Magic. Drawing cards, it's always been good, and Jayemdae Tome, while it's expensive to use, consistently drawing extra cards, very powerful.
At this point, Urg Raiders' drawback does start to come into focus. If Stan does not attack with Urg Raiders, they attack him. He gets takes 2 damage, so he's just going to save himself the time and just send them in so he doesn't have to worry about that anymore.
So the life total's now already 7-17, and along comes a Rook Egg. So Cifka, he's got defense against what Jason Chan has going on if Jason suddenly decided to switch gears, but also he's still providing a little bit of a threat to life totals with that Vampire Bat. Another Ironroot Treefolk coming down, so lots of toughness on Jason Chan's side of the battlefield. No defense against flyers, though, and there's one already in play and the potential for another very easily.
Jason can't actually attack. If he attacks, then the Rook Egg pops, and all of a sudden he's just dead to the 2 flyers. So, and that Drain Life will just about seal things up. It means that Stan needs to get 1 more hit in with Vampire Bats in order to finish things off. And even if, let's say, Jason drew an answer to the Bats, Stan is 2 swamps away from winning with Drain Life because you can only spend, of course, black mana to deal X.
Drain Life, of the various common X spells, probably the worst, but at least common X spells that deal damage, Stream of Life not included. Probably the worst, but it's still dealing a lot of damage, and Stan does not need to find very much damage at this point. Unholy, the strength, the pickup there for Jason Chan. Not an answer to any of the problems on the other side of the battlefield. We could be onto a quick 1-2 for Stan Cifka in this best of 5 finals.
Jason would love to draw Berserk. He doesn't have very much time, but if he draws Berserk, he might be able to end up in a spot where he Howl from Beyond to give one of his creatures like +6/+0, and then Berserk's it.
So setting up the lure this turn, I guess at least leaves the window open to be able to do that on subsequent turns.
Well, I think she's going to Unholy Strength the Rook Egg, actually. he could do that and then, well, oh, because of lure, he's actually able to not kill the rook egg, and so then he just attacks in for 8, puts Stan down to 9. Unfortunately, that means Stan can attack back with the vampire bats and the Walking Dead if he wants. So Stan needs to draw 1 swamp to finish off the game.
I mean, I like the fact that Jason Chan was able to find a line here to give him the potential to win this game. Unfortunately, he finds himself against a very, very tough deck in the hands of the Pro Tour champion Stanislva Cifka here.
Well, actually, that lure is going to be good enough, I think. It's going to be really close because Stan is 1 swamp away and he drew a mountain. And Howl from Beyond plus lure means that Jason's going to be able to attack with everything and just get lethal through, even through the Drain Life. Stan's going to have to throw out Drain Life at this point here. Maybe you just attack with the Vampire Bats in order to leave it tapped so it doesn't die to the Moss Monster. But he can put Jason down to 1, but actually I think that at this point that the Lure plus Unholy Strength turn was able to save Jason here.
Jason Chan, a consummate gamer, playing all sorts of things on his stream with nearly 900,000 followers now. Plays a lot of Hearthstone, plays a lot of Magic Arena as well. And getting in so many reps with so many games does mean that he's got a fair sense of how racing going, and it may be that he's been able to turn this one around. Adding extra creatures to the board doesn't really change a whole lot for Cifka here because of that lure.
Yeah, and Cifka doesn't know that he's dead. But so I think Cifka might end up doing here is because he needs to cast the Drain Life in order to get above the 8 points of life he's going to take from the unblocked creatures. You Drain Life Jason down to 2, put yourself to 11, attack with Vampire Bats so it doesn't die to the lured Moss Monster. And you could actually attack with the Walking Dead as well, because that'll force the Moss Monster to kill the Rook Egg. And it's not like having additional blockers helps anyway. But what Stan doesn't know is that he is, of course, dead to that Howl from Beyond.
We mentioned all of the X-Spells in Cifka's deck. It may well be that, at least for this game, it's Chan's X-Spell that closes things out. So Cifka chooses to pump the bats there.
Oh, interesting. Cifka just dies to an attack at this point.
Yeah, the lure on the Moss Monster means that this should be enough.
Well,
Jason shows off the Howl from Beyond. Just, you know, getting as much damage in as he can. I can respect that. Each of these players are now 1-on-1, and now we have a regular best of 3 in our hands. Each of these players has managed to pick up a game. This is all now looking at post-sideboarded games, and we talked a little bit about the fact that there were going to be some tweaks. The Red Elemental Blast for Stan Cifka almost certainly not going to be a feature in the deck, but what does he bring in here?
So looking at Stan's sideboard, he's got a couple different options. Certainly do want to bring out the Red Elemental Blast. I don't mind Wall of Stone, just because you end up blocking the 3/5s pretty easily with that. Lure makes Wall of Stone feel a little silly. There's also Hurloon Minotaur, but with 7 mountains, you're not super excited about that. Desert Nomad's a 3-mana 2/2, and there's also Paralyzed, but I find that card to be pretty ineffective in this format. The games just go long enough that making them spend 4 mana a turn if they want to attack their creature, generally not worth a card. I actually don't hate Underworld Dreams. First of all, it's good against Jason's Jam Day Tome, and second, just getting an unblockable 1 point of damage a turn is not the worst in this format. Just the games can go kind of long, though these games have been pretty fast.
On the other side of things, we have Jason Chan. Now, the first thing that we've spoken about, and I think this has been fairly consistent for him ever since the quarterfinals, is I think that he recognizes that only having 2 mountains plus his fire sprites in order to be able to cast Shivan Dragon, a little optimistic, shall we say. And so something that we've seen him doing quite a bit in the matchups he's got so far is taking out Mishra's Factory, adding in a mountain just to give him a little bit better chance of casting his bomb. Once we get past that, are there any other substantial changes that you anticipate seeing here?
Well, I would actually add the Mishra's Factory back in and take out your worst spell. I think Mishra's Factory as a 19th land is better than, something like a Zombie Master, just because Mishra's Factory is a 3/3 blocker and it taps for mana. So even with 19 lands, sometimes you do want to draw your 5th land. So I do like adding in more mountains. I think having 2 mountains and 1 fire sprites is optimistic is one word, but it is just not enough. Like statistically, like if you look at the odds of drawing 2 of your 3 sources and your Shivan, the odds of doing that by turn 6 or 7 are just way too low. So I do think that Amaz is correct to put in a 3rd mountain, but I would be inclined to just take out something like, again, Zombie Master is not the best card because he just does not look like he has any other zombies. So it's just a 3 mana 2/3.
Yeah, the Zombie Master, originally printed as a Lord, is now a zombie, but it can't help itself out with granting that Swamp Walk and indeed regeneration. If there had been a few more zombies, though, it would have been potentially a pretty nice synergy that he could have got going there. Kind of a bit of a feature, actually, thinking about it from beta. A large number of Lords that didn't, at that point at least, have too many creatures to go along with them. That kind of took a little while to brew up for players as they gradually built decks over the first few years of the game.
Yeah, there's 2 goblins for Goblin King and 1 merfolk for Lord of Atlantis and 1 zombie for Zombie Master. So a small start to the tribes which have now grown substantially.
Absolutely, and Lord of Atlantis. I mean, I would venture to suggest someone within the Pro Tour this weekend may well have been playing it. Still a staple in many merfolk lists.
Yeah, when I talked to Alexander Hain, he was on a Legacy as well. He was on my team, and we played the same Legacy deck. He played against Merfolk in Legacy.
So these guys now just shuffling up, making sure that they get a goodly randomized deck before they go into this 3rd game. I guess that it kind of works out that even though Cifka has all of these powerful X spells, I actually don't think that Jason Chan's deck is terribly set up against, at least, for example, the Pestilence. He has enough toughness on his creatures that he's going to be able to consistently have something that survives that big board sweeping effect.
He doesn't auto lose to Pestilence like some decks. It's still just a fantastic card. Like it still was really instrumental in Stan winning game 1. And the fact that Stan has Blazing Effigy and 2 Rook Eggs means that it's just still very good, which really highlights how absurd the card is. Because you're correct in saying that, yeah, Amaz's creatures are good against Pestilence. And yet Pestilence is still one of Stan's best cards. There's a reason that we haven't seen Pestilence printed in a set in, I don't know, 15 years, something like that. Or as a Saga, I guess, was the last time I can remember it coming out. So it's 18 years now.
Yeah, it's been a little while. But, I mean, there are plenty of cards from each of these players' decks that we've simply not seen yet that could very easily take a game pretty quickly. Mind Twist from Cifka is one of those cards that almost any stage that he plays it in the game, it will have a fairly dramatic impact. And then, of course, the red spells from Jason's deck, we've just not seen them yet. We've not seen Shivan Dragon. We've not seen Fireball just yet. Either one of them, I mean, anytime either player draws a Fireball, it's going to change the face of the board pretty substantially.
Well, Amaz hasn't actually drawn any mountains yet either, though. So he's in some degrees lucky that he hasn't drawn red spells. He would not have been able to cast them.
Now, one card I want to ask you about, Luis, that was at least in the main, sat in the sideboard for the starting game for Jason Chan is Kumbaj Witches. 1/3 from Arabian Nights that can tap to deal 1 damage to a target, but then you let your opponent deal 1 damage to a target too. We saw it be very, very good for Chan in the semi-finals after he boarded it in. Is it something that's worth considering here?
I would have certainly played that card. I actually do in the main deck, but actually looking at Stan's list, I'm not all that happy, but it still blocks Urg Raiders. It blocks and trades with Hazran Ogress. It can pick off Walking Dead. I think Kumbaj Witches is just an amazing card, so I would have certainly played that, and I think I would side it in.
So it looks like we've got a mulligan here for Amaz. He's going to be going down to 6 cards. The mulligan rule in 2018, a lot less savage than the ones that there were in the very early stages of the game. Back then, it was a little bit tougher if you happened to draw a hand. The only time that you could actually mulligan was when you had all lands or no lands.
It's true. Ironically, I would have been inclined to keep that hand, so under those rules, Amaz would have been forced to. It was a risky hand, no doubt, but he assuming Cifka chose to play, assuming that Jason is on the draw, a hand of Swamp, Black Knight, Hypnotic Spectre is just such high upside that I would be inclined to run it. But I certainly don't fault him for mulliganing. That is a risky hand. But I think Hypnotic Spectre is the card the number one card Amaz wants in his opening hand. So once you have a Swamp and a Hypnotic Spectre, and then a Black Knight also, which is an excellent 2-drop if you draw another Swamp, then I'm pretty interested in running that one.
Now, what is it about Hypnotic Spectre that really stands out in this matchup, or is it just generally just one of the most potent things that you can be doing in the first few turns?
It's not really matchup dependent. It's mostly it's a small evasive creature. It's really hard to block, and if it connects, then the game's almost over because it means your opponent's just discarding a random card every turn.
Yeah, the randomness, huge for the Hypnotic Spectre. All right, so we're off to the races. Down with the Swamp on turn 1 for Jason Chan, and the same again for Cifka on the other side of things.
Yeah, Cifka actually chose to draw first, so I definitely like Jason's decision to mulligan. I certainly would have done so as well. Like I said, I wasn't sure who was on the player draw, but Cifka won or lost the last game and chose to go second, which was a good call.
I mean, I guess that's something that gets more interesting when you expect games to go long and when you have powerful spells.
Certainly, and those Kumbaj Witches are going to do some work here. They already are picking off Vampire Bats for free, and that's going to make Cifka pretty unhappy because a turn 1 Bats is a very nice clock.
As things stand, Cifka, he's got a bit of a thought, bit of thinking to do about what he wants to do on this second turn here. Hazran Ogres, you mentioned that this is another card that the Witches can trade with. The 3/2 attacking in, you block and then shoot.
Yeah, you sometimes will take a point for your troubles, but still a good exchange. Like at this point, if Amaz wants to, he can trade off the Witches for both the Bats and the Ogress. It'll take a turn. He has to take a hit first, but still getting there.
And there is the Mountain for Jason Chan. He does still have red in his deck. There was no way he was going to be siding out those powerful cards. And his hand's got some real power in it. Gem Day Tome, Amulet of Krug just coming down there. That can prevent damage to a creature or player. So kind of a combo with those Witches. But then he also has his own Pestilence. And Pestilence right here looking all right.
The Witches are kind of shutting down Stan's Walking Dead as well. So the Witches just really proven to be an excellent card here.
Yeah, for those of you that like to play old school Magic, Kumbaj Witches, they see a little bit of play in there. Black, one of the popular decks in the format. So here we see the Witches initially just shooting down the Vampire Bats. Get rid of them first so that later on they can potentially trade with Hazran Ogres.
Forest, a pretty good draw for Amaz just because he's so many cards in his deck are green, so he's going to be able to start casting whatever he draws here, and then if he can stabilize the board, of course, Gem Day Tome will do a very good job of letting him pull ahead.
Now, if you're Amaz, is it more important to get threats on the board here than the Gem Day Tome? I guess it's going to be a while before he can really activate it.
Well, his options are to play Gem Day Tome or play Pestilence. If he's attacking, it means he doesn't want to trade with the Ogress, so he could play either. But it is kind of interesting how this plays out because Amulet of Krug plus Pestilence is a nice combo. So at this point, Amaz can shoot the Hazran Ogress and then Pestilence for 1, and then use Amulet of Krug even. So he only takes 1 point of damage from that exchange. Hazran Ogress dies, and Cifka's left staring down Pestilence plus Kumbaj Witches, which is a potent combination.
Yeah, very difficult to keep creatures on the battlefield with so many different ways that Jason Chan, without even needing to draw a removal spell, can just remove things based on what's on the board. Now, one of the things I note as well here for Cifka, he's been pretty slow to play a land this turn. Or slow to do anything, in fact. This does feel like a format where games go long and you do want to hit your land drops, especially like both of these players have things to do with a lot of mana.
Yeah, they both have a bunch of X-Spells and Pestilences, so they don't mind. Like your 5th and 6th lands are usually pretty welcome.
As it stands there, Cifka, the only mana that he spent that turn was 2, so that when he attacked with Hazran Ogress, he was not going to take any damage himself. And here's our Forest from Chan.
He could even use Kumbaj Witches, use Pestilence, and then play Gem Day Tome and still have out develop his board while killing the Hazran Ogress here.
Activate, I choose this, and then your choices.
I guess the one boon for Cifka here is that at least the life total's a little bit in his favor right now.
Yeah, it was important that he got in those couple hits with Ogress to make sure he didn't get burned out by Pestilence. Though, at this point, Amaz is pretty vulnerable. If Cifka can kill the Kumbaj, which is the Pestilence goes away also.
Yeah, nice little combo there. Pestilence at the end of turn. If there's no creatures in play, it will go away. That sickness will kind of wither and die. As things stand, though, a creature that doesn't mind being killed off by some combination of what Jason Chan has going on is that Rook Egg from Stanislav Cifka. This might be the point, I guess, where Jason starts looking at his Gem Day Tome.
Yeah, and this is, now that you've got the shields up, you have Amulet of Krug, Pestilence, and Witches kind of all protecting you, Gem Day Tome really starts to become very effective.
And this is actually really the first time in the entirety of the Silver Showcase that we've had a chance to see Gem Day Tome in action. It's something that, obviously, is a potent part of Jason Chan's deck, but a lot of the time he's just been assembling cool plays with Lure, Howl from Beyond, getting Pestilence going, and so on and so forth.
I know when Amaz played against David Williams, he ended up winning one of the games of Gem Day Tome, but that may not have ended up on camera.
So is this end of turn and then trigger on the stack, and then something comes in, right? Yes.
The templating on these cards can be a little odd.
Now, in terms of that, I mean, it sounded to me like that was a coded question of, if I wipe the board, will Pestilence get to stay around?
So what's going to happen is, at the end of turn, Pestilence will trigger if there's no creatures in play, and then, but the Rook Eggs will trigger also. So on Amaz's turn, if he wipes the board, I believe that the 4/4 flyers show up, and then the Pestilence ends up triggering. But then it sees the 4/4 flyer.
Well, here we see a Terror from Stanislav Cifka, killing one of his own Rook Eggs just simply so he can generate a 4/4 flyer. And that, I think, is really going to swing things a little bit here. Exactly where the victor is living right now, a little bit less clear, because a 4/4 flyer does not have very much work to do to close this game out.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that was such a good play from Stan is that it pressures Amaz's life total a lot and makes Pestilence a lot less effective as a result. And having the double Rook Egg in play actually does mean that if Jason wants to kill the flyer with Pestilence, it kills the other Rook Egg, makes another flyer, at which point is Jason's at 3, maybe 4 if he uses Amulet of Krug first. But either way, going to have a hard time Pestilencing both flyers down. Let's see, he does have the Swamp. So what he can do, he can also use Pestilence on Stan's turn so that the second Rook Egg doesn't get to attack him yet.
So wait until the Rook attacks, then start going crazy with Pestilence, just so that there's a little bit of a moment of respite.
That is a plan you could do, but he chose to activate Gem Day Tome and actually drew Hypnotic Spectre, which does let him block if he wants.
I mean, of course, this is Jason Chan playing to the board. If there's more from Stanislav Cifka in hand, it's not going to take very much to make us go on to our game 4 here.
Certainly, Cifka will instantly win if he draws any of his X spells. Cifka, I didn't realize, he may have sided that in. He did. He sided in Ashnod's Altar. It's a 3-mana artifact that you can sack a creature to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. That's to combo with his Rook Eggs. It's to generate the Rooks.
Kind of an interesting one.
Black-red sacrifice, from the early days.
Sam Black would approve. Ashnod's Altar, a card that has seen play at the highest level. It's been in various combo decks as ways of generating colossal amounts of mana, but right here it's generating bird tokens, and that could easily be good enough. Jason Chan on 3. That Pestilence, if it's going to kill anyone, it's going to be killing him now.
He's maybe looking to see if he wants to activate the Kumbaj Witches to tap the Walking Dead. Because he does have Howl from Beyond. Maybe in one of his outs, maybe to use Howl from Beyond plus Berserk to essentially give a creature plus 10/+0 plus whatever its power is. So that's 14 damage off Hypnotic Spectre, 16, 17. It's still actually wouldn't be there unless he has... I guess he has another land in hand, so... Oh, Stan deciding that he wants to just upgrade into another rook right now.
All right. I'm not quite sure what it can be that Chan can draw here to get out of it, but to be honest, Chan has been able to pull out a few tricks out of the bag already in this Silver Showcase. Can he do it once again here, snatching a second win in our final?
I don't think so. Because Pestilence does not quite do it. Assuming that Stan chooses Amaz if he activates Kumbaj Witches, which I believe he will, then Pestilence won't quite get it done.
An interesting game that we've had here. The game where you have Pestilence and then lose is not a particularly common occurrence in Magic the Gathering.
No, Rook Egg is just a very important card in this matchup, and I like the sideboard tech of Ashnod's Altar. That gives Stan a better way to upgrade his Rook Eggs than using Terror on them, though that also was quite effective this game.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's an artifact that Jason Chan is going to feel the need to bring in Shatter to deal with.
No, looking at Stan's deck, that'd be the only artifact, and I think shattering it is pretty ineffective because he also will just often get a use out of it first.
All right, so that is the victory in Game 3 for Stanislav Cifka. Cifka just one win away from the title of champion, and we had a chance to see these decks in action. All of these decks, every single card drafted in this, and we're talking about, it was 3 packs of beta in the draft per player, plus Antiquities, Arabian Nights, and Legends. All of those cards, they will all be going up to auction for charity, for the charity of Child's Play, helping make sure that children in hospital have a slightly nicer time of it, I suppose. And Stan Cifka here, he's going to be trying to figure out what he can do to just finally close things out here. I was really interested to see him choose to be on the draw in that game. I'm intrigued to see whether or not, having seen that, Chan might adjust some of his choices going into this next game.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, at this point, I think that there's a good chance Chan also might choose to draw just based on how the games go. It's a lot about hitting your 5th land drop and having, more resources. But it also could, he also could want to do something like have Graders in his deck, though they look a little poor against Rook Eggs, so it's kind of tough. I just want to see the combo of Howl from Beyond plus Berserk. That is a nice little 1-2 punch.
Almost all the times that Berserk has been used by Chan thus far, it's been in a slightly unusual way. So Berserk itself as a card, on the face of things, looks very, very simple. You play it on an attacking creature, that creature gets its power doubled up, it gets trampled, but then at the end of combat, it will die, even if it didn't happen to die in combat anyway. Now, the way that Chan has used it, in the quarterfinals, he used it against Dave Williams, and there, he was being attacked by a personal incarnation that would have been a gigantic problem to deal with any other way. He sucked it up, took a big hit, but ultimately killed off the best threat that Dave had by making one of Dave's creatures berserk. In the semifinals, he used it because he was able to double up the power of a creature that was not attacking on defense. It was a Black Knight that then had first strike and was able to successfully tussle with a big creature that Paulo Vitor Damarosa was attacking with that was posing a little bit of problems. Jason Chan has really used every piece of the buffalo of Berserk except for just straight up killing people with it.
That card saw some play in Legacy this weekend, Infect decks. Mostly to kill people, though.
Yeah, particularly potent in Infect, just because Infect already kind of feels like you've doubled up on your damage, so then being able to double up on it all over again with an instant speed spell in green just means that you have to do very little damage indeed to win a game.
I saw Stan did, in fact, side an Underworld Dreams. I like that sideboard plan.
Yeah, and I think I caught while he was shuffling, actually, in the last game that Paralyze might be something that he's playing with. It's a tempo play more than anything else, because when you first cast it, it does tap down a creature, but as you so rightly state, Luis, these games, players seem to have enough lands in play that it's not going to be a long-term answer.
I have largely been unimpressed with Paralyze when I've played it in formats like these, and I've done a couple of these kinds of drafts, so...
Yeah, you're fortunate enough to be in the first one of the 25th anniversary drafts this year.
Yeah, in Las Vegas, I was able to win a seat for that, and it ended up going out pretty well. And then last year at Gen Con, actually, I was able to win a seat to the unlimited through Saga Rochester draft, which has a lot of similarities to this format as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's worth noting that while these days, every set when it comes out, we know that R&D has spent a lot of time and effort trying to make sure that the draft format is super well balanced, finely poised, offers people both signals as to what they should be thinking about and indeed lots of different reasonable directions. At the point that Magic the Gathering first came out, draft wasn't really even a twinkle in Richard Garfield's eye, if you will.
No, it was a couple years. Mirage was the first set designed for draft purposes. One interesting thing that just came up is Amaz sided out black. He's presented a red, green, white deck, which is going to make his mana base a lot better. He's playing more mountains than he was before. He's also going on the land destruction plan. He's got Ice Storm and Stone Rain in his deck. So this is going to be pretty interesting to see how this plays out. You know, he's choosing to go with Mesa Pegasus as a splash card instead of going with the main black cards.
This is going to be very, very interesting indeed. Karma, a gigantic card potentially in this this set of games here. Karma, one of the strongest color hoses that exists in Magic. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, they take damage equal to the number of swamps that they have in play.
Oh yeah, Karma's awesome. So one of the funny things is that Amaz is going to have the Stone Rain, Ice Storm, Karma plan, so he does not want to blow up Stan's swamps. Though he is dodging Karma himself by not presenting any black cards anymore.
Now, obviously, cutting black cards, a substantial hit to his deck. There's a reason that his deck was not in this configuration to begin with. He's going to be losing out on Pestilence. He's going to be losing out on Black Knight. He's going to be losing out on Hypnotic Spectre. These are all good cards. I guess that given the way that things have been going thus far, he feels like he needs to make a substantial change, and he could definitely catch Stan out here.
I like the sideboard plan. I think it's very smart. Basically, Stan's deck is much better, and Amaz is going to lose a lot of the normal games that happen, so making his red cards more consistent and boarding in Karma, I think, puts him in a spot to steal some games against a superior deck.
Well, there is a Pestilence in the opening hand for Stanislva Cifka. This is going to be an interesting game. Pestilence, one of the various cards that are very, very potent in Stan's deck, but now there is potentially a way that Jason Chan can fight it. We'll find out exactly how this works as we go into our game 4.
Now, Jason's hand is pretty dubious. He's got Giant Strength, Berserk, and 5 lands, none of which are forests. So yeah, I don't like keeping that hand. That hand just does not have much upside.
Now, I guess, given that Jason has moved into white, one of the cards that I immediately started scanning his pool for to try and figure out if he's going to be able to bring in was any copies of Circle of Protection. Circle of Protection is one of those, well, there are 5 of them. Each of them is potentially very, very good at really shutting down an entire element of what the opposing deck is doing, giving you a way of preventing damage from that color very cheaply indeed. Doesn't look like that's the case for Jason's deck. The Circles of Protection were kind of being defensively drafted all around the table by players.
Well, the Circle of Protection is an interesting feature of beta drafts, especially Rochester. In the draft in Vegas, the deck I faced off against in the first round was the best deck of the table by a pretty decent margin, with 3 fireballs and an earthquake and a bunch of crawl worms. But I had drafted Circle Red and Circle Green and locked my opponent out completely.
All right, so this hand that we see from Jason Chan, it's a little awkward. He's a mono green hand. He saw a Haloon Minosaur on the top of his deck. That one went to the bottom. If he's able to get through the early stages of this game, though, there is a little bit of power there, and he's got a Wailuli Wolf off the top, which means that he's actually the first person to get a creature on the board. This one, the 1/1, named after Tom Wiley. It's a 1/1 that can tap to give a creature +1/+1, and that would be a respectable card even now.
Yeah, Wailuli Wolf is great. It's a bit of an on-the-board trick, so you wouldn't see it show up at common too often in modern-day sets, but it is certainly, that's not for lack of power level.
And also, love that Susan Van Camp artwork. Ice Storm coming down from Jason Chan. He wants to keep Stanislav Cifka from getting anything going here. Ice Storm, I think it's... correction on the name there on Wailuli Wolf, but Ice Storm, it's not something that we'd see in the regular color pie now. The color pie very much not baked at this point that Beta came out. Being able to destroy land, being in both black and in green, not really something that we would expect to see quite this way these days.
Well, both players had a land destruction spell in hand. Stanislva, Cifka had Sinkhole, Amaz had Ice Storm, and Amaz was the first on the board there. But Stan drew a second Swamp. He's gonna now want to Sinkhole to try to keep Amaz off Jam Day Tome activation, and Amaz doesn't have another land in hand. This could, this game could get pretty wild. Oh, this attack was a big misstep from Stan. He now attacked into essentially a 2/2 blocker, and now he's going to regenerate his Walking Dead, but he's not going to be able to cast Sinkhole, which means Amaz is going to get a Jam Day Tome activation, which snowballs into more Tome activations. Had he Sinkholed this turn, Amaz wouldn't be able to activate Tome, and now that Amaz has done that, he's found his 5th land, which he would have a turn later anyway, but that was a pretty big swing, and I think Stan deeply regrets attacking there.
And Amaz, he's got some reasons to want to get plenty of lands in play. The Shivan Dragon is in hand. He's already got one mountain, and a plane's being taken away there by the Sinkhole. I guess that right now, Cifka, he's desperately thinking, what white cards have I seen? And Karma has to be the thing that he's considering here. And with all swamps, Karma would represent a pretty game-ending answer to what he's got going on.
And Cifka has Terror in hand, so even the Shivan off that mountain is not something that really scares him too much.
How many turns can Stanislav Cifka stand watching his opponent drawing 2 cards to his 1? Stream of Life also in for Chan here. Obviously, if you're picking an X spell, it's not going to be top of your list, but gaining a lot of life may mean that race situations get kind of tricky for Cifka here.
Yeah, it's a decent way to put yourself out of, Fireball Disintegrate range if the game comes down to that.
All right, here comes Shivan Dragon for the first time in our finals. This one of the more iconic cards in the whole of Beta, and we saw it just absolutely crushing in the quarterfinals against Dave Williams. He will be shaking his head and thinking about Shivan Dragon for quite some time. As things stand, it looks like Cifka may have an answer all ready to go for the big dragon, but the dragon, if it stays in play, can close out games very quickly indeed.
So Stan does have a little bit of board control with Pestilence. He can regenerate Walking Dead, Pestilence. Amaz activates Wolf on itself, then regenerate Dead again, Pestilence. But first things first, he's going to want to Terror that Shivan Dragon. Doesn't need to do it now because there's nothing Amaz can do to stop it, and you might get a few fire-breathing pumps out of Amaz, but yeah, that Jam Day Tome is really what is the problem here.
Yeah, I don't believe that Chan ended up with any copies of Avoid Fate or similar to keep that Shivan Dragon a little bit safer. Even if he went for casting Regeneration on it, in response, that Terror would be enough to deal with the dragon.
Now Amaz deciding how many fire-breathing pumps he wants to do, balanced by wanting to activate Jam Day Tome. He also has a Fire Sprites in hand he could cast, but that's not all that impressive in the face of a Pestilence.
For now, just drawing a lot of cards seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and actually, Jason here willing to pump some red mana into it, and I guess this is a great reason for Stan to wait on his Terror rather than casting it last turn.
Yeah, you get to let Amaz sink a few damage into it.
2 times, right?
No, 1 time.
Oh, 1 time I tap to give it.
19 both.
Okay.
Wily Wolf gets to save itself from the Pestilence there.
Just the once, though. The Walking Dead having regeneration means that there will be a way for Stan Cifka to make sure that he's able to keep at least one creature in play with Pestilence. And here comes Hazran Ogros after the Pestilence gets activated. A 3/2 that's going to be able to start attacking quite nicely.
Well, Jam Day Tome's powerful. So is Pestilence, though. It's gonna be an interesting race. Also, Stan is stuck on land, so even though he doesn't have a Jam Day Tome, if he draws lands, he still has plenty of spells to deploy.
So Unroot Treefolk coming down, still 3 mana to work with. That not quite the right number for the Jam Day Tome, but maybe there's a spell lurking for Chan that he can work with. Meanwhile, look at everything that Cifka has sat in hand. Drain Life actually looking pretty good at some point because of all that black mana. Paralyze could potentially mean that he can continue to get hits in here, but all those red spells, they've only just been turned on thanks to the mountain that Cifka has only just found.
Paralyze can also let Stan get an attack in here if he wants to deploy that, and it looks like he's going to.
Yeah, I mean, this is the best case for Paralyze, where you immediately get to make the most of the fact it taps down a creature.
You're 15, and I'm at 13.
The Hazron Ogress punches both players because Stan declined to pay the mana, wanting to instead get a Rook Egg into play, it looks like.
I can respect that. Here comes that Rook Egg. We've seen it's been so good in this series already. 0-3, when it dies at the end of turn, you get a bird token, and that bird being a 4-4, one of the most imposing creatures in this particular series.
Yeah, the Rook Eggs are a huge part of this matchup. Oh, there's that Karma. Luckily for Stan, he chose Plains earlier, and that's looking like a really good decision. Amaz is now 2 Plains away from drawing or playing that Karma, and he can't have that many Plains in his deck.
Yeah, throughout the history of this draft, we have been talking about Jason Chan's mana base having some optimistic or ambitious inclusions, lots of double mana cost, and even after sideboarding, while Shivan Dragon much easier to cast, this Karma still proving a little bit tricky. I mean, I guess that one thing that Chan has going for him here is that Stan Cifka will be figuring out his plan based on the life totals being pretty static, like unlikely to go up too much. And with so many lands in play, a big stream of life from Jason could really throw off a lot of that calculation.
Stan has an interesting decision here. He could actually send in Ogress and a Walking Dead, even pay for the Ogress. If Jason blocks, you let the Ogress die, and then during your end step, you Pestilence to finish off the Ironroot Treefolk, plus probably an extra 1 to finish off your Rook Egg. And the board ends up being clear. You do lose your Walking Dead, but you end up with a 4-4 flyer and a Pestilence versus no board on Amaz's side. And then with 2 X spells in hand, you figure if you can get 1 hit in with that Rook, then that's going to keep put Amaz really behind against the 2 X spells. Though, like you said, the Stream of Life could swing things a little bit.
Disintegrate in hand. So in terms of figuring out where the various X spells sit, the big difference is that Jason Chan a lot more lands in play than his opponent here. I guess that the Disintegrate means that he may have a cleaner way of dealing with Ironroot Treefolk at some point.
Yeah, I like this play. This is where I would lean. Because if Amaz blocks the Walking Dead, you could also just regenerate it, play Urg Raiders, and continue, and you get 3 damage through. And Cifka hasn't played a land yet, so he could even be representing the 4th or 5th swamp in hand.
Ironroot Treefolk does take down the Ogress there. And now we see the board getting largely cleared by the looks of things.
Oh, this is not going to work the way... Oh, no, he can control his own triggers. Okay, so yeah, Stan can choose to put the Rook into play, then have Pestilence check that there's creatures. So this will work out just fine. He could also have gone to his own end step if he wanted to.
Because he controls both triggers, he can just try
Yeah.
stack it how he wants.
That one of the rulings that our judges, they were scouring these deck lists, just making sure that they were kind of ready for some of the key things that could come up right at the very start of this Silver Showcase. That one of the ones that there was some gleeful rubbing of hands from the judges. They knew that it was going to be a nice one when it came up.
So Amaz is an interesting spot where you don't want to just cast Stream of Life. It doesn't really, help you advance your board. But if you don't, you're just, potentially in danger of getting disintegrated out.
Disintegrate, or indeed just one more swamp for Pestilence to do it. So life total suddenly 18 to 12, and Ruck flying over to do 4 to try and stabilize that a little bit.
Pestilence is just an unbelievable card. Like, at this point, Cifka can just use Pestilence to deal 3 damage to each player, keep his Rook alive, maybe even play Urg Raiders if he wants, or he can break it up over multiple turns so his Rook doesn't die. Like, do 3 damage now, 2 damage at the end of the turn. That puts Jason to 9, and then you attack down to 5, and then you don't even need the X-Spell at that point. Pestilence can just finish the game off.
Yeah, this is a very rough rough game for Jason Chan. I really like the spot adjustment that he made, and had it worked out that there wasn't that sinkhole from Stan Cifka, there could easily have been a Karma coming down at some point in this game, and Karma would have been gigantic on this board. Cifka, there's this kind of his chess route that he's quite happy to sit and work his way through the permutations, sit on his hands before touching any of his pieces and making a play.
And what Cifka might be thinking is, if Amaz fireballs me next turn, what happens? Like, I can't use Pestilence, or in this case, maybe draws a Plains for Karma. Either of those options. So yeah, I like casting the Drain Life, and the reason is, if you just leave mana up for Pestilence and you get fireballed or Karma'd, you actually can't necessarily activate the Pestilence. So you might as well give yourself a life cushion and deal the 4 to Amaz right away.
Yeah, Drain Life, only 1 fewer point of damage than you were going to get off a Disintegrate that turn.
So Cifka is a point short of winning here. You can attack Jason down to 6, and a draw of Swamp or Mountain finishes the game off with a Disintegrate or even just Pestilence activations.
As things stand, still having to draw more cards with that Jayemdae Tome. Probably a good sign for Cifka, if anything. Moss Monster and Fire Sprites come down. The Fire Sprites, importantly, do have flying.
Yeah, Pestilence is going to be able to clear them out, which means Cifka's a land away from just winning. But I don't think he can even get fireballed or Karma'd out at this point in the game, so it's going to be hard to imagine what Jason can do to win here. Because Stan can Pestilence for 1, attack, put Jason to 5, play Graders and pass, have a blocker for the Moss Monster. You play around, getting fireballed, you play around getting Karma'd, you play around getting Berserked. It's going to be really hard for Jason to get out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that by my count, he's going to need 2 very good cards here. Now, obviously, he's been drawing a lot of cards, so it's not impossible that could happen. But Berserk on its own, not going to be enough. There's not the likelihood of Howl from Beyond that there might have been in previous games to combine with that Berserk, meaning that, yeah, this is a pretty slim set of draws available for Jason Chan here if he's going to find a way back into this Silver Showcase. Cifka has his opponent down to 5. He's only got 4 points of damage from the swamps he has in play with Pestilence, so instead chooses to just flood this board. So many different ways that Jason Chan could find himself out of this Silver Showcase in the very next turn. Draws a Plains.
So Karma essentially deals 5 to Cifka, but that puts him to 10, still pretty far away from dying. Karma plus Jayemdae Tome activate doesn't leave you enough mana to really fireball. And that will do it. The Pestilence will just do the trick.
So the Karma does come down. Jason Chan showing his sideboard plan, but big smiles there from Stanislva Cifka. He is our Silver Showcase champion. Congratulations to Cifka. Black-red going all the way, so many X-Spells, so much power in that deck, and ultimately able to ride that to victory in spite of some very interesting pivots from his opponent, Jason Chan, in this finals.
Yeah, Pestilence is a great Magic card.
So these players, they're just kind of showing off exactly what they were working with their opponents. The 2 Ruck Eggs, pivotal. You see there, Stan holding them up. They did absolutely fantastic work. A common from Arabian Nights, and there's a story of even the common cards from these early sets, so potent and ultimately instrumental in the victory of Cifka. He shows off his signed deck box there. Each of the decks from this draft will be available for auction. Some of these, some very desirable cards from the early days of Magic. And congratulations to Cifka. He will be very pleased, and I'm sure we'll hear from him soon. But for now, that is the conclusion of our Silver Showcase, but far from the conclusion from our day. That kind of just the prelude to everything going on here at Pro Tour 25th anniversary. To find out all about everything that's coming next, let's hear from the news desk.
Tim, thanks for the call there. Great stuff. And congratulations to Stanislav Cifka. It was kind of child's play in the end, and that's the charity that will get all the money raised from the auction that's going to be at the end of the year. every card you saw in the Silver Showcase will go to that fantastic cause, which is basically, in case you don't know, they send Xboxes and PlayStations and books and toys and games, of course, like Magic and so on, round the world to children's hospitals for kids leading pretty tough day-to-day lives, but just trying to have a little bit of gaming awesomeness in their lives. So that's what Child's Play does. That's where the money goes. Why don't we hear, Maria, on the floor from our winner, straight out of the gates, Stanislav Cifka.
Thanks, Rich. I'm here with Pro Tour champion Stanislav Cifka, now Silver Showcase champion Stanislav Cifka, and each time you played eggs.
Yeah, that's my powerhouse and my secret weapon, you know.
How crucial were those rook eggs to this red-black deck that you built for this event?
It depends on every matchup. Against Shuhei, they were very weak because he had only 2/2s and a lot of counter spells. But again, in matches versus Finkel and versus Amaz, they were amazing. So in the end, yeah, it then turned out to be pretty good.
Now, I want to ask you about one turn, obviously a chess background, and it really came into play there. About 3 turns to go for you, your third from the last turn. You really went in the tank, and you had the Pestilence in play. You had the Rook token in play, but you were really thinking about what to do, and you eventually decided to drain life your opponent. Can you explain what was going through your mind on that turn?
Yeah, I had a lot of source of damage. I had Disintegrate in my hand, and I felt I may not have time to sneak in all these, spells because the karma could come from the top. And in the end, it came. So I needed to start utilizing my resources in order to get a tempo, and I felt it was the turn when I utilized my mana perfectly, and in the end, it turned out to be the victory play. Yeah.
Now, you saw that Plains in that last game. Did you had a pretty good idea what was up once you saw that Plains?
Yeah, because Amaz's only good card is Karma as a white, but it's incredibly good. I was not sure if he's gonna bring it because I have Disenchant and Plains in my sideboard, but I would mess up my mana base, and I had a good way how to fight back versus Karma because I had a sinkhole, and if he's splashing the white, I destroyed the plane, and it was kind of crucial. And I also have a Mind Twist in my deck, which didn't show up in any game. But if he's waiting for the top decking plane, I just Mind Twist it. It could work. So yeah, it was definitely a very solid option from him. But I guess I was ready against this plan. Yeah.
All right. Well, great job this weekend, Stan Cifka. He built playtest cards so he could practice draft this format. You playtested this finals with your friends, right?
Yeah. I would like to thank a lot my testing group because they did an amazing job, especially Jan Kotrala. He worked so hard for the whole month with me. We prepared a lot, and also I would like to thank PV because we shared a lot about this format. He made it to semifinals. Unfortunately, he lost, but yeah, I felt we did a great job during the preparation, and it was the main part of the victory, I would say.
I think that's amazing. A lot of people talk about a beta draft as this kind of freak event, this weird outlier. But even in a format like this, hard work, preparation pays off. Stanislav Cifka is your Silver Showcase champion.
He certainly is, BDM, and there you see him, Stanislav Cifka from the Czech Republic, a master of so many games, and we saw so many different disciplines of the true gamer coming to play over the last 4 days. The draft on Thursday, the quarterfinal win on Friday, semis yesterday, and then here in the final, he took down Amaz to claim the title. Let's take a little moment then to review the weekend in terms of the Silver Showcase. Paul, so great to see so many literally old favorites on show.
Yeah, it definitely brought back a lot of very nostalgic moments. I mean, I started playing this game over 20 years ago, and I remember opening my booster packs and looking at cards like Crawl Worm and just all these iconic cards, and just being able to instantly recognize these cards as they were opened. I got to see the beta draft earlier as well from Gen Con, and it was just so nice to see, and yeah, just takes me back
nostalgia
to the old times.
fest.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's true. I think because one of the things I loved is people are often asking, which version of the card we're showing on screen. But you think about Shivan Dragon. Shivan Dragon has been winning games for people in 1994 when they're reading it for the first time. It's been winning in 6th edition, in 9th edition. It's been in M12, 15, whatever the years are. And for each generation of Magic player, cards like that are iconic. Now, I've never seen a beta JM Day Tome. But JM Day Tome is the first ever Magic Rare I owned because it was in the 6th edition starter pack that I got given. And so that's the very first start of my Magic journey. So to see that in play at the end of the Silver Showcase, wonderful.
And it's pretty cool, too, for me as somebody who came to Magic a little bit later and returned to Ravnica to watch these older cards opened and to see people like Paul just watching these drafts and having so many nostalgic memories is really cool to see where the game that I love came from, in a way.
Right, and also, look, the Silver Showcase has been about the past of the game, the present of the game, and the future. And one of the things that's so great about the digital world is that, yes, these two guys behind us were sitting here in Minneapolis this morning. But you know what? This afternoon, maybe you can fire up Arena and play Amaz because he's going to be on there drafting if he gets the chance, right? Again, Magic is such an inclusive community that you do get the chance to play against and maybe even beat your heroes when you go online, whether that's Magic Online or Arena. And Arena, for sure, is very much going to be a huge part of Magic's future. So 25 years are done and dusted, and so is the Silver Showcase. 8 tremendous players came in to look at some of the most iconic cards in the history of the game. At the end, Amaz, part of Magic's future, faced someone who was a Pro Tour champion in 2012 from the Czech Republic. And in the end, whether it was chess or Hearthstone or Magic or just so many great games that came together to be his gaming experience, Stanislva Cifka became the champion of the Silver Showcase. Coming right up, it's the Pro Tour as Magic $1 Million Weekend continues. Don't go anywhere.